So with the release of Thor Ragnarok, this week is Marvel Week on my channel. A few days ago, I put out my ranking of all 17 movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in under 10 minutes. That means I had to be concise and talk really fast. And then a couple days after that, I put out a video where I ranked all of the Hulks throughout all of the years. And now we are talking about all 4 of the Thor movies. Yes, all 4 of them. 3 of them starring Thor, and then one of them kind of like being a reverse of Ragnarok in that it's a Hulk movie that Thor does appear in a very different version of Thor and a very different version of the Hulk, but they did appear together in a movie almost 30 years ago that was made for TV, so made a little bit of a deep cut. Now, before I give my ranking, be sure to give me yours down below in the comments section. Hey, you probably haven't seen the 80s TV movie. No worries, just rank the 3 MCU movies, your thoughts on them. We can dig a little bit deeper on this one with the Marvel 17. There's so many movies, it's a little bit tough to go deep. This one, we can dive in deep into our thoughts on all of the Thor movies. With that said, let's start talking about these. All right, so I put up a Twitter poll just a couple hours ago. Get your thoughts on what you think about them. Here's what kind of came up on it. No surprise here, Thor Ragnarok definitively came in first place with 80% of the vote. Here was a bit of a surprise for me. The Incredible Hulk Returns, our TV movie, actually got 7% of the vote. Now, I don't know if that's an ironic vote, people just screwing with my polls, but it did get 7% of the vote. And no surprise here, it looks like we only got 1 vote for Thor: The Dark World, and the first Thor got a few votes in there as well. From there, let's jump on over to Rotten Tomatoes to see how they have scored these movies over the years. Coming in at number 4 is going to be The Incredible Hulk Returns. Now, it's only got 4 reviews counted, 3 negative, 1 positive for 25%. Not really surprising, there aren't a lot of reviews counted, but it is at the bottom. Coming in at number 3 is Thor: The Dark World with 66%. And that's a little bit surprising because this is kind of the Marvel movie that probably the most people kind of crap on a little bit, put it in their last place. I know I do, and it's still positive on Rotten Tomatoes, and I get that. It's a very watchable movie that doesn't live up to a lot of the rest of the MCU, but not a bad movie by any means. And then jumping up from there, you've got the original Thor with 77%, so a very solid, respectable score. But coming in at first place is one of the top rated on Rotten Tomatoes movies in the MCU, maybe the top one, Thor Ragnarok with 93%, which by any estimation, that really is a great score to have on Rotten Tomatoes. No matter what your movie is, if you're doing a blockbuster, you're well, any movie, you're very happy with a 93%, let alone the 3rd movie in a trilogy, the 17th movie in a franchise. That's a very nice score, and it's a fun movie, so it's not terribly surprising. All right. From there, I'm going to dive in and start going through my ranking of all of the Thor movies. Coming in at number 4 is going to be The Incredible Hulk Returns. Now, as I said, this is a made-for-TV movie from the 80s based off of a continuation of the Incredible Hulk TV show from the 70s, which is a show I enjoyed. I grew up kind of watching it, the reruns on TV, and owned some of the sets for it on DVD, and so I rewatched it from time to time. And I think if that's your kind of show, it's a very dated form of storytelling, I think it holds up pretty well. This movie, however, would not be one of the great episodes if it was an episode, and it's not an episode, it's a movie. There had been a several-year gap, like a 5-year gap. They came back, and I think they were trying to set up these backdoor pilots, is my understanding of what they were doing with these TV movies, trying to continue things and bring in some of the other Marvel characters. And so then Thor appears in this one in a very prominent role, except it's not the current Thor as we think of him from the MCU or even from the later current version of the comic books. It's kind of this older dated version where Donald Blake is a guy that has Thor's hammer and can summon Thor whenever he would like to, and he's kind of, Thor is a bit of Donald Blake's, I don't know, servant of sorts that just happens to be a Norse god. And the movie has a whole backstory of how this works, but it all plays out very cheesy, and it's a little bit, this version of Thor is a little bit like a Shazam of sorts, where there's 2 people and one summons the other, and Thor's hammer's involved in it. And then when you see this stuff on screen where Thor is there, it looks like a Saturday Night Live sketch. It looks like Saturday Night Live production value. The fight between Thor and the Hulk is is not good. I mean, just all stuff like that of them growling in slow motion and throwing each other and stuff. Nothing exciting. Even the environment they picked for it doesn't seem conducive to having a big brawl between the Hulk and Thor. But the big problem here is that the plot of it is just utter garbage. Like you can put up with the dated production values, that the TV budget, the dated version of Thor and all that fun stuff. But the story of it, it's David Banner is once again fallen in love with a lady and trying to find a cure for himself, which is like the plot of half the episodes of the TV show. And then one of his former students shows up, surprise, it is this Donald Blake with the Thor hammer, and they get into some shenanigans. And then like it's this whole separate thing. There's people trying to steal the technology and the research and this mob plot that it's kind of like they shoehorn these two things together. It feels very much just like an episode of the show, just kind of like this throwaway plot line. And it's not very surprising that this Thor did not get his own TV show out of this. All in all, the novelty of it is interesting. There's a couple familiar faces in here that I enjoyed kind of seeing. The guy that played Jay Allen on the Flash TV show from 1990, as well as Charles Napier, the guy that was the evil government guy in Rambo First Blood Part 2. It's fun to see him in this, but beyond that, it's the only thing that makes it interesting as a movie is just that this weird thing exists out there that most people aren't thinking, oh yeah, that's right, Hulk and Thor were in a movie back in the 80s. And it was pretty terrible, so it comes in it safely, easily, no question. It is definitely my number 4. Coming in at number 3 for me is going to be Thor: The Dark World. Now, if you've checked out any of my Marvel MCU ranking videos, you know this one is my least favorite of the Marvel movies. Now, I've also said repeatedly in my videos, all of the Marvel movies are very enjoyable in the sense that they're very palatable entertainment. And this one might be the filler episode of the whole franchise, but it's not like this horrible, awful, like offensive thing. It's just the highs aren't particularly high. The lows aren't particularly lows either. It's just kind of, I'd rather watch any of these 16 other ones. There's something about each of the 16 other ones that are more interesting to me. So I don't hate it. I don't have any angry feelings for it. I'd probably even give it a little bit of a very slight, that much of a recommendation, that much of a thumbs up. That's kind of where I've fallen, just so we're clear on my thoughts on it. But the movie, the reason it falls flat is it feels like a movie that doesn't quite know what it wants to be, in that it's trying to be kind of this Lord of the Rings-esque big story. So it starts off with this backstory of our villain Malekith. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I always forget how to say it. Kind of give his backstory, and then we see Thor on this big adventure in the realms, battling things and saving people. So very Thor type things to do. That's kind of fun to see. And then shortly afterwards, we're on Earth, and it's fish out of water humor. There's an intern, they got Kat Dennings from the Broke Girls TV show, and you're like, whoa, we're like 10 minutes into this, and we've shifted tones very radically. It doesn't feel like a cohesive single vision for what the movie's trying to be when it does that. And then as the movie progresses, you get later in the movie, and when Loki works into it, and Loki and Thor work up, and they have to like escape, and they're in a ship. And when that happens, the movie feels like suddenly this buddy cop movie with these two bickering guys back and forth, quip, 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 quip. Every single line is a joke between the two of them. It's like, wait, what movie are we in now? Like, we just changed again. And it continues on, and in the end, there's these dramatic tragedy, and several characters die, and the stakes get dark, and the color scheme changes. And so it just kind of feels all over the place for me, and that there's not one thing that I grab onto. It's not the funniest of the movies. It isn't the most engrossing plot of the movies. It doesn't handle a bunch of things. And so it just kind of feels like this well made in the sense that it's very professional, slick. There's some jokes that land. There's some action sequences that land, but nothing that really just cuts through and is super memorable. And looking at the director of it and kind of putting some of this together, it's directed by Alan Taylor. So he's a very celebrated television director. I mean, this is a guy that has Emmys on his shelf, Game of Thrones, Sopranos, all kind of the heavy hitter great shows of the last 10, 15 years. He's probably directed some of the best episodes of that show. So that's kind of who he was, and you can understand why they went, hey, let's give this guy a shot at directing Thor, especially he did Game of Thrones. They went, you just did a great Game of Thrones episode. There's certainly some fantasy, epic Game of Thronesy type things that could certainly translate to Thor. And then we see it and it doesn't translate so well. Likewise, he also did Terminator Genesis, another movie that feels all over the place. It can't decide how it wants to do this blockbuster, well, darker elements and true to the original, changing things up, humor thrown in awkwardly, and the pieces didn't quite come together. And it's difficult to not kind of really point the finger at Alan Taylor and say, seems like you're really good at when the template is set there before you and you really know what it is. You're amazing at directing a story when that's kind of clarified for you. But when you have to figure out the tone of all the pieces and it's not defined for you by the show and the showrunner and the episodes that came before, it seems like he struggles with that, is what it looks like. And you see that in this movie. And so for me, it's the movie that feels the least like it knows what it wants to be, has the fewest things to say that they're distinctive. The villain is only memorable for how unmemorable he is, even though we get this big epic backstory for him. The movie gets going and he's just kind of the bad guy that's out there trying to do evil things. Having seen the movie 3 times now, I have to look up the plot of the movie to try and articulate it to you, which I'm not going to do right now. But that's the type of movie it is, where things happen, they're not boring, but they don't stick with you. So for me, this one pretty safely kind of comes in at third and the worst of this MCU trilogy of Thor movies and the weakest of the MCU movies for me in general. Coming in at number 2 for me is going to be Thor, the original in this MCU trilogy, and the first with Chris Hemsworth in that role. And this is a movie that I find very enjoyable. It's got a lot of great things going for it. And I love Natalie Portman, the sense of humor to it. There's a bunch of things about it that work really nicely. So we'll just start off. Let's go through the different elements of it. Chris Hemsworth, perfect casting. Amazing casting. And like we look at it now and you think, oh yeah, Chris Hemsworth, of course. Prior to this movie, he was... The only thing I'd seen him in was the first 10 minutes of Star Trek 2009 where he played Chris Pine's dad. That's all I'd seen him in. He was kind of skinny in that, and he was memorable. I mean, that first 10 minutes, he's amazing in it, and pops, and just like you see this guy and you're like, wow, this guy is taking not a lot of screen time and turning it into a screen presence. And then he's cast in Thor, and obviously physically, the being able to pull off being this massive guy that's handsome and looks like the Norwegian god of thunder. Perfect. Amazing, amazing casting. Wonderful. And then it brings kind of the humor to it at different parts. And I guess they didn't even know at that time just how funny he was. And so he's funny at different parts in it. And he could have even been funnier if they'd probably known that. And so he's, of course, amazing. Since I'm a big fan of Natalie Portman, seeing her in this, does a good job. Not a great job, but does a good job. Doesn't necessarily fit they didn't find the right way to work with her. I don't think to make her really shine, but she's not doing a bad job. And from their other major players, Kenneth Branagh, so obviously legendary director with his long history of Shakespearean work. So you take this Norse mythology and the idea of kings and stepsons and betrayal and all that fun stuff and bring it to the MCU. And that director, Kenneth Branagh, is a great choice to do that. And so when you see Asgard, it has this sense of awe and wonder and spectacle to it. You get the sense of royalty and grandeur throughout all of that. And so for me, where the movie starts to struggle a little bit is that when the actual plot starts to move forward. So we've got Thor is arrogant and a petty person and gets kicked out and sent to Earth. And so you have all of this big, grandiose stuff, and then you send him off to this small town, I believe in Arizona, New Mexico. And the story that actually transpires there and the ingredients of how all that works out seems very small scale. And some of that's intentional. Obviously, it's supposed to be to rinky-dink little two-street town. There's a sense of that's the whole idea of it, is that he's the middle of nowhere and all that sense of grandeur is gone. But the plot that transpires in this setting that feels so small, he's just kind of wanders around for the whole middle act, and then the guy shows up and starts blasting rays around and stuff like that. And then we go back to Asgard for our third act. And it's just the actual conflict story in the more of the stakes of it, of the adventure, of what Thor needs to do to prove himself. All that, it never had the emotion that first act had. The actual themes of fathers, sons, living up to reputation, responsibility, all that stuff. It doesn't feel like it lived up to that. It wasn't like, oh yes, Thor is now worthy of his hammer again. Like, I didn't get that from this tale that we had in the venture that we went on once we got to Earth. And likewise, one of the central themes of this, going back to our Natalie Portman issue, is that so we have this one of the big romances of the MCU that, we just found out a week ago that they broke up. So in theory, this has been going on for a while. In their time together, 2 days? 2 wacky days where she's figuring out whether he's a Looney Tune or not. She knows he's hot. He's Chris Hemsworth. And he's bulked up Thor, Chris Hemsworth. So of course he's hot. But actually getting to know him, she thought it was crazy the first day. And then you've only got day 2 where you're actually getting to know him as who he is. So, I mean, it just kind of seems a little bit like trying to build a romance out of this when you have a story that, once again, it's so small scale. It's 2 days, a long weekend to fall in love and prove you're worthy. That seems like we could have given more time there to stretch the story out and build the stakes and the epic adventure. And so that's where I want to like this one more than I do. As I really like it. It's very good. It's just not great. It just feels like it bumps into issues as soon as we get to Earth with the scale and scope of things, this romance that they're trying to pull off. And also feel like it could have been even funnier, especially now that we know just how funny Chris Hemsworth is. It could have been even funnier. So there you go. That's where that one falls in at number 2, even though it's a very solid effort. But coming in at number 1 is going to be Thor Ragnarok. So I don't know how many times in history the third movie in a trilogy has so definitively been the best reviewed and most beloved of the trilogy. But kudos to Taika Waititi. He has made that movie. And I think what it was is this is the movie that of this MCU trilogy, actually I guess we'll call of all 4 of them, that has the most consistent tone, that knows exactly what it wants to be and delivers successfully what it's trying to do. Because you look at Thor the Dark World and it's like, okay, are we the Lord of the Rings? Are we Game of Thrones in the MCU? Are we Fish Out of Water? Are we wacky buddy comedy? It's kind of going around, and it wasn't fully successful at even figuring out what it was trying to be, and then it wasn't fully successful in general. And then the first Thor movie was really good at the grandeur, but not as strong as the plot story as it unfolds. Sets things up nicely, and it didn't fully deliver for me on some of those other elements. This movie, I think, fully delivered on what it was trying to do, which is this wacky Flash Gordon-inspired adventure through the different realms, saving Asgard as Asgard is at, well, I don't want to say too much as to where things go, but saving Asgard as defined by the movie. And it does that consistently. There's a couple plot issues in there, and with the Warriors 3 and some of these moments that could have handled been better, but it's moments that could have been handled better, a little bit few plot contrivances. The actual scale of what they were trying to accomplish in a consistent tone with the humor, the feel of it, the themes having setup and payoff, all of that, it actually works and it delivers on all of it. And very clearly what he was going for is the word everyone is using to describe this movie: fun. And the reason we're all describing it that way is because clearly that's what he wanted. That's why you would pick such a vivid color spectrum for your movie. Have this cool synthy 80s retro throwback score that just feels like enjoyable to be in. That's why you cast Jeff Goldblum and populate this movie with so many vivid, vibrant, fun characters with amazing actors with quirky personalities to back them and bring them to the screen. Just all around, this movie is kind of one of those dreams come true. It's a dream come true for comic book lovers, movie lovers. It's just an entertaining, fun film to watch, and it shows Going back to our number 4 pick of when they try and do Thor back in the 80s. And it's you just get a big guy and you get the 2 muscle-bound guys throwing punches in slow motion, jumping into a bunch of cardboard boxes, spraying some sparks behind them. That's what it looked like back in the day to try and do a superhero story, to what they can pull off now with the scale, the spectrum, and being just able to find the tone to do something so ludicrous as this movie. And as so many people love it so much, it's just such a thrilling to know we live in a time where movies like this get made. That's why I rank this one really high in this list. That's why I have it really ranked really high on my Marvel movie in general list, because I like space. I like Star Wars, you might have been able to tell. But I like just that sort of stuff, and then bring it into a comic book movie with just this weird, over-the-top stuff. I grew up watching Flash Gordon, put it all together. This is just a movie made for me. Even the type of the score in it, I've been listening to it in my car all week during work. So I'm just so thrilled that a movie like this exists. So there you have it. There's my ranking of all 4 of the Thor movies. How about you? Tell me your rankings down below in the comment section. Like I said, we can go a little bit deeper now that we're not trying to do 17 movies, so give me some thoughts. Let's get some discussion going on. I know Dark World's got its defenders. I know the original Thor has its defenders, and some people don't like Ragnarok all that much. So tell me your thoughts down below. And if you're new to my channel, please consider clicking that subscribe button. I do movie reviews, TV reviews, ranking videos. Hey, you're watching a ranking video right now. But the key thing is I don't want to just talk about movies. I want to talk about movies with you. So join me in the comment section. Let's have a lively discussion. And thank you so much for watching.